So that's the first good evening to prepare you that Facebook. We're now live on YouTube. How about that? Yeah. Next we'll get word that we're live on Facebook. Y'all have your Bibles with you tonight? Y'all ready to finish Acts chapter 25? Y'all may not be enjoying Acts, but I have just been loving going through the book of Acts. I really enjoy going through it. And there's so many little historic details that are in there that little things that you can skip by it and miss it if you're not paying attention. Little things that you don't. There was an echo there for a moment. Yeah. It's not doing it now, but it was there for a minute. I don't know. If you're watching out there on Facebook and YouTube, for some reason we've got a glitch in the system. They're trying to work it out, and we're working on getting it sorted out. But we're going to be in Acts chapter 25, and as we were looking at Acts chapter 25 this morning, I had mentioned that we see some leadership changes, and we see some people that died during the 2 years that Paul was in captivity. One of those people that died was Ananias. Ananias was the chief priest, and he was the big driving force bringing the charges against Paul back in previous chapters in 22 and 23. And he has died now, and we're 2 years later, and Felix was replaced by who? Festus. So Felix had been the governor. He was replaced by Festus. And Felix was known to the historians that wrote things down at that time, such as Josephus, that Felix was a very evil man. And you may remember that he was delaying taking action on Paul because he was hoping that the Jews would give him a bribe. Do you remember that? That's how evil the guy was. Now, we go to Festus, who is the new governor, and Festus was known for being a fair man and stern but fair. He was much better thought of than was Felix, his predecessor. He only ruled as governor for 2 years. His rule was cut short because he died. We still having difficulties? Okay. So that all being said, we know that Paul made his appeal to Caesar, and which Caesar was it that he was making his appeal to? He's one of the worst emperors Rome ever had. I heard somebody say it. Nero. Now, in the beginning of the reign of Nero, Nero was highly thought of, and Nero was known for being a good ruler in like the first 4 or 5 years of his reign. So Paul would have heard these stories. Everybody talks about who the president of the United States is and what he's like, right? Word gets around. Even when there wasn't radio and television, people knew what kind of king they were dealing with. And the Roman emperor, Nero, in the beginning of his reign was highly thought of. He was known for his being a just man and for him being fair. But as his reign went on, he became, at the end, known as one of the most evil. It is believed by historians that the great fire that destroyed Rome, that he set that fire because he wanted to burn out the slums and the areas that had lesser houses on it, because he wanted to build his grand palace. And that palace was built on what is called the Palatine Hill. And Jeannie and I saw that. We didn't get to see the ruins of the palace, but we saw the Palatine Hill, and we started making our way up there. But it had gotten late enough that we had tickets to see the Colosseum, and we wasn't going to make that time if we went on up onto the Palatine Hill to see that. But when Nero burned all of that to the ground to make room so that he could build this palace complex and all of this great stuff, these emperors, like the pharaohs in Egypt, they like to do these grand constructions and put their name on it so that they would be remembered throughout history for what they had built. And when he burned all of that, who did he blame? He blamed the Christians. He was known for becoming very brutal against Christianity, and it's said, it's not been proven, but it is said that he would wrap Christians in flammable material and line the pathway of his courtyard with them on crosses and set them on fire to light his garden at night. That's how evil this guy was. He would wrap Christians in the skins of recently killed animals and bind them up and turn loose wild dogs on them. He was a very evil guy. He is also the man that ultimately would sentence Paul to be killed. But at the time Paul's making this appeal, it was in the earlier part of his reign where he could hope for and maybe even expect justice. So, I don't know why, but somebody's blowing up my phone with text messages all of a sudden. So we began this morning with looking at verses 1 through 9 and seeing that a new leader is coming into the picture now. We saw that there's new leadership, but there's also new plots. We see another character introduced to us, which is King Herod Agrippa. And King Herod Agrippa he was a very evil king. He was the grandson of the Jewish King Herod that had ordered all the babies to be killed because he was trying to kill Jesus. This is the grandfather of this king, Herod Agrippa. And Herod Agrippa, Rome allowed them to have, as they did in many of their provinces, when they would take over a country, there wouldn't change a whole lot of the structure of the country. They would just say, you are Roman now. We're going to do things the Roman way. We're going to build Roman roads. We're going to give you Roman bathhouses. We're going to have fountains and running water in your towns. But we're going to allow you to keep a king in your area. And this kind of set up the beginning of the ceremonial king. So like in England still has a king, but that king is a ceremonial king. They still recognize their royal family, and there's certain privileges that they have, but they don't make law. They can't say someone must be executed in things like a real king would have. So Rome would come in, they'd take over these provinces, and to keep peace, they would find someone local that was of a royal lineage, and they would set them up as a puppet dictator, give them just a little bit of authority so that the people could say, oh, we still have our king. This Roman thing is good for us. Look, we've got water, clean water now. We've got a bathhouse. We've got great roads. And people began to love the Roman rule because of the things that Rome brought to them. Now, one of his duties, that King Herod, one of the duties that Rome allowed him to have is he would be able to appoint the new chief priest. And we notice as we're going through Acts chapter 25, and we've been through this previous mini trial type thing that happened before when Oh, the previous chief priest. I had his name a while ago. Now it's escaping me. Ananias, thank you. Ananias was pushing this thing. He has died, but we're during this period when the new chief priest hasn't been named yet. So we're seeing King Agrippa get involved here, and he hasn't named who the new chief priest is going to be in Jerusalem. Now, where this kind of correlates to modern day ceremonial kings is the King of England or the Queen of England, whichever they have at the time, they are the head of the Church of England. They get to appoint the leadership of the Church of England, because the Church of England, even though it's very much like the Catholic Church, it is separate from the Catholic Church. It's considered to be Protestant, even though many of their structures and their beliefs are so similar. If you walked into one of their churches in England and saw them have a service, you're going to say, man, this is a lot like a Catholic church. So the king or the queen of England is recognized as the head of their church, where King Agrippa for the Jews is basically filling that position as a Jewish puppet king, because he gets to name who the head priest will be. So if you look back through your histories and you're looking at the history of the Catholic Church, there was a time period when they were going through popes like 3 or 4 a year. And there were a couple of big families in Italy that always wanted to have someone from their family be named the Pope. And they were poisoning and stabbing and killing off different popes, and they went through a bunch of them, which is probably almost built into their DNA as living in the Italian continent, because they did the same thing with emperors. There was one year where they had 5 emperors in 1 year, because they kept killing them off and moving to the next one. So when Festus came in and replaced Felix, in verses 4 through 6, the Jews were trying to set up this plan that they had previously done back in chapter 22 and 23, where they had said, we'll wait for him on the road, and when they're transferring him, we'll ambush him and we'll kill him. And what did the Roman, the guy in charge of the Roman garrison, do you remember what he did? Because so Paul's nephew, which we learned this in that was the only time a family member was brought into the story, one of Paul's family members, and his nephew came to this Roman garrison leader and said to him, hey, they're going to kill him on the road. And you had this group of, like, was it 100 of them? No, the group that was trying to kill him, there was like 100 of them made the vow that they weren't going to eat or drink until they had killed him. Well, so we saw that all transpire back then. Well, now it's been 2 years. They don't have Ananias anymore, but they still have the same plan. We want Paul dead. So this new guy's not going to know our old plan. Let's see if we can get him to send Paul to Jerusalem, and we'll ambush him on the road and we'll kill him. And his answer to that in verses 4 through 6 was, no, we're not going to do it like that. If you don't like this guy and you got a problem with him, you come up here to Caesarea and we'll have us a little meeting and we'll get to the bottom of this. So in verses 7 through 9, we saw that there were all these unproven allegations, and Festus wants to do the Jews a favor. So I did some more studying on this in one of my commentaries, some more reading this afternoon. And as I was telling you earlier, Festus was known for being a good ruler, a good governor, and he was known for being fair. When it says that he wanted to do the Jews a favor, what he's trying to do is he's trying to come to some sort of agreement that will keep peace with the Jews. So they won't have riots in the street. They won't have all this trouble. But at the same time, he doesn't have to kill an innocent man that, oh, by the way, is also a Roman citizen. So he's trying to do this in a fair way, not as Felix was trying to do a favor to the Jews, which was to wait for a bribe. He was happy to kill Paul. It didn't bother him any as long as he got paid for it. So in verses 10 through 19, we saw where Paul is given an opportunity to plead his case, and he pleads his innocence, that he has not done anything against the Jews, that he has not done anything against the Word of God, that he has not done anything against Rome, that I haven't done anything worthy of being put to death. This is a repeat of his innocence that he stated in the previous chapters. Paul recognizes the authority of Rome. He recognizes that they are the governing authority. They are the ones that get to make the decision on life and death and imprisonment. He even goes as far to say with great confidence that he is willing to submit to punishment if he is guilty, even being put to death. He said, I'm fine with being put to death if you can define what the crime is that I've done that is worthy of death. In verses 12 through 14, we saw that when he appealed to Festus, Festus had given him an opportunity to go down to Jerusalem because that was the favor the Jews were asking, go down to Jerusalem and face trial. Well, he knew what was waiting. He knew they were going to kill him if he went to Jerusalem. They'd either kill him on the road or they'd find a way of killing him when they were in Jerusalem. So he pulled his trump card. As a Roman citizen, he can make an appeal to the emperor. If you're a Roman citizen and you've been put to death, you have the right to appeal that, to have the emperor hear your case. So he pulls that trump card. And when he does, we see that Festus answered him with that famous statement. Do you remember what that statement was? Yep. You have appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you shall go. And sometimes when reading that passage of Scripture, we read that more dull and more mundane. You've appealed to Caesar you will go. But we saw here that it is written as a question. You have appealed to Caesar? As a question. Then the next part of it is a sentence that ends with an exclamation point. To Caesar you'll go. It's a proclamation from a guy with great power, sending him on to the other person, the only other person, the one that has more power politically than him in this case, which would be the emperor of all of Rome. In verses 15 through 19, we see that he has to have a proper trial and he has to be able to meet his accusers. In verse 16, to them I answered, it is not the custom of Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets his accusers face to face and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charges against him. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that is written into our United States Constitution. You have a right to meet your accusers in court if you are accused. It is not the custom of Romans to put somebody to death without them meeting their accusers. That's how far back that goes in our history. In verses 20 through 27, we found that they were having a hard time figuring out what they're going to charge him with. So let's just read verses 20 through 27. And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. What we have here is the writing, the statement of Festus that he is going to be sending to Rome with Paul to go before Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself tomorrow. He said, you shall hear him. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp and circumstance and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city at Festus' command, Paul was brought in. Let's pause there for just a moment. So, who is Agrippa and Bernice? Agrippa is the king of the Jews, appointed by Rome, a figurehead appointee. And Bernice, who is she? It's his sister, but also his wife. Now remember, this is a time period where it was very customary for the Romans and for the Egyptians that they wanted to keep the royal line in the family. King Tut, you remember the great tomb of his that they found and all that gold that was in it? His wife was his sister. Romans, Greeks, Egyptians, a lot of times their royal families, it's the reason why there was so much insanity amongst these rulers is because of all the inbreeding. Now, when we talked about the Roman Emperor Nero earlier, we talked about that at the beginning of his reign, he was very reasonable and well thought of, and then all of a sudden he started becoming crazy and doing all this nutty stuff and having people killed off, and he just really switched. One of the things that they have learned about the Roman system to bring water into the cities, the Romans made lead pipes. They would take sheets of lead and they would pound these sheets out and they would roll them into a pipe. And when we were in Pompeii, we actually saw some of those lead pipes uncovered. They even had valves like we have today, those slotted valves that you can put a crescent wrench on and turn. They had valves where they could turn water off, or they could make water stop going to one place and go to another. It looks very much like modern plumbing, but it was made out of lead. Now, what do we know about lead poisoning? What does lead poisoning do to your brain? And they think that so many of these Roman emperors, they would begin by being someone really well thought of that had really moved up through the armies and through politics to become an emperor. But then once they got there, in a short period of time, they were nuts. And they think it's because they were in other parts of the city and in other provinces, those lead pipes would stay there for years and they would get minerals. We live in an area close to a town called Mineral Wells. And what happens when you have copper pipes or steel pipes that have had this well water in them for a great number of years, and something goes wrong and you have to work on it? What does the inside of that pipe look like? It's coated in minerals. They think that the reason that the emperors got so much more lead than everyone else was because these lead pipes, everybody else's lead pipes had all this calcium and lime built up on the inside of them, so it wasn't passing lead anymore, while the emperors were constantly upgrading their mansions, constantly upgrading their villas, constantly building new ones. So they were getting a fresh flow of water going through fresh lead, and so they were getting a lot more lead than everybody else. And what happens when you mess with lead a lot? Little pieces of it break off. And so they surmise that this is one of the reasons so many of the emperors went nuts. So moving on to verse 24, and Festus said, King Agrippa and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. Let's pause there for a moment. So we talked about earlier how historians like Josephus had talked about how much better, how much more the fairness of Festus as opposed to Felix. He's heard the case and he's saying, guys, this guy's innocent. This guy hasn't done anything that would deserve death. Not even anything that should have him in prison or have him beaten. You guys just don't like him because he's not doing things religiously the way you want him done. This isn't against the law. This isn't worthy of the death penalty. And so he says, having seen that, and Paul being a Roman citizen, he's decided he's going to kick him up to the next level. So this would be like going from being convicted in a district court and getting kicked up to the Supreme Court. The case keeps not going well in the lower courts, and we're going to keep going until we get to the Supreme Court, is what this is analogous to today. I have nothing certain, verse 26, I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore, I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. See, he is putting his case together. Okay, you've asked for this, you guys. You really want to keep pushing this because I'm putting all this information together, and realize this emperor appointed me to be here. Okay, so what does that tell us? That tells us he's either got a really good relationship with the emperor, or his reputation was such that the emperor knew he was the right guy to go be the governor over this troublesome province. This is a guy that's got the ear of Caesar. He's telling them, he's not even trying to mask it, guys, I'm going to send what I think about this case with him. Do you really want to go through with this? We're going to ask him all these questions, and I'm going to be fair. I'm going to send him what I believe. Verse 27, for it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. See, he's putting them on notice again. What are you crazy guys thinking? Just leave him alone. Let's just drop this thing. You don't have anything to base this on. We've been going at this for years. Even the corrupt guy before me couldn't find any reason to kill him. We've been waiting for 2 years. Now I'm here. I'm the governor. And the case hasn't changed any. The appeal to Caesar set the plans of the Jews into question. This king of the Jews, Herod Agrippa, he wants to hear the case. Now, as I was reading those verses, remember it says that King Agrippa and Bernice came in with great pomp and circumstance. So have you ever seen a royal entry? Never seen one personally myself, but I've watched them on TV and on the news. It's pretty impressive when they do that. And this guy, you can tell that King Agrippa was one of those guys that really wanted the attention. He really wanted it. So he's brought out the best of the royal jewelry, the crown and all of that stuff. He's got Bernice dressed up in all of her best stuff, their royal robes. They're probably carried in on a litter by a group of men carrying them in. They probably laid down a special carpet for them so their feet wouldn't have to touch the nasty ground of the Romans, because the Jews thought of themselves as God's chosen people, and they're really clean, but the Gentiles are nasty, filthy people. I don't even want to be in the same room with them. They're just nasty, right? That's how they thought of themselves. But at the same time, these nasty people, they rule the whole world, and they can kill us like that. But we want to come in and really make them think we're something. So they're coming in. They're wanting to show their authority because he also has been appointed by who? By Caesar. He's been appointed to be the ceremonial leader. And here we have Festus, who is the political and military leader. So Festus, who has more power here? Festus does. But Herod's coming in, and Herod is trying to say, we're equals. You're Rome's guy here, but Rome's guy can't control all these crazy people without me. I'm just as important as you are. So he's trying to put on a big show as he comes in to impress everybody. Because realize that Festus isn't someone that has grown up in Judea. He's not a guy that's from that area. He's a Roman. Now, he may have been born out in one of the provinces to a Roman soldier and then back to Rome to go to school and grow up. His experience is not this place he's been sent to, and he's only been here for like 10 or 12 days at this point. Because remember, he went, as soon as he came there, he was only there for a day or two when he went down to Jerusalem to meet this bunch of knotheads, and they kept him there how long? 10 days. And in that whole 10 days was spent, can we kill him? Can we kill him? Can we kill him? Can we kill him? Right? That's what that whole 10 days was about. They tried every way in the world to talk about how evil this guy is, how bad he is, all the trouble he's stirring up. And for 10 days, then he goes back to Caesarea and he says, you guys are going to come here and we're going to talk about this. And oh, by the way, King Agrippa, you're going to come too. So who has the power? King Agrippa showing up, or the guy that said, King Agrippa, you're going to come here? The guy that told the king he's going to come there is the one that's got the power. He wanted to put on a great show of how important he was. He's trying to manipulate Festus with who he is and his importance because he thinks he'll get what he wants. Now, does he really want Paul dead? Probably not, because he thinks he's above the Jews. He thinks that they're just silly people that follow this silly religion, and he's one of them by birth, but he's not really with them. He wants to be more like Rome, but he's in charge of them, and because he appoints the chief priest, he can control them. So he's trying to manipulate the situation where he can give them what they want. They'll recognize him as being a good king, and peace will happen, which will make everybody happy. Festus asks the all-important question, what are you going to charge him with? Now, there were a lot of ways to get put to death in Rome. Murder was a capital offense. Stealing certain things, capital offense. Starting a rebellion, capital offense. There's a long list of things that would get you killed in Rome, things that were worthy of the death penalty. But all they have here is a group of religious differences, religious quarrelings. So you take, for instance, we're Baptists, and when we baptize someone, we do it immersion. Why do we do immersion? It's the way Jesus did it. He went down into the Jordan and he was baptized. Now, you look at artwork from the Middle Ages that was influenced by the Catholic Church, and they show John the Baptist doing this with a little saucer of water and pouring it over Jesus, and Jesus is going like this, and that's not how he was baptized. But that's how they depicted it in their artwork, because how do Catholics baptize? They hold the baby over a basin, and they take that little saucer thing and they pour the water over the baby. So Catholics do it that way. We do it this way. Methodist Church splits it down the middle. You can be sprinkled or you can be baptized. We'll do it either way. Okay? That would be like, in this case, if we move that into modern times, that would be like someone taking me before court and saying, you must put Brian to death because he baptizes by immersion. And we're Catholics, and the Catholic Church has existed since the first century, and we do it by sprinkling over the baby. And he must be put to death because he does it that way. Now, do you think an American court would sentence you to death? Is that a death penalty as far as the United States of America is concerned? No, it's not. That is the level of silliness that this appears to the Romans. You've got a minor disagreement when it comes to religious things, and you're wanting to put this guy to death for it. You're going to have to bring me some charges that equal the death penalty. Now, they tried to do that in that previous trial, the one where the Roman centurion came in and snatched him out of there so that they couldn't kill him. They were trying to say then, when they went to that centurion, hey, y'all have got to put him to death because he's causing us to riot, and that's going against the peace of Rome, and he needs to be killed for that. He's making us riot. Sound familiar? They're trying to follow the law right now, and people are saying, you're causing us to riot. Well, we're following the law, and you're saying we're causing you to riot. If some friend or family member of yours, you've gone a great number of years and you've never drank a drop of alcohol, and this family member convinces you to go to a bar with them, and you drink with this family member that gets you to go to the bar, and y'all all drink a lot, and on the way home you get a DWI, would you be able to walk into the court and say, my family member caused me to get this DWI. I haven't drank in the last 20 years, but they made me go drink with them, and they need to get the DWI. How would that work out? It would not. You, you made a choice when you drank. You made a choice when you got in that car. It's the same way with those riots and the riots that we're having today. The rioter decides to riot. Doesn't matter how right they think they are, they have made a decision to do that. And when they destroy government property, that's a crime. And they're not innocent of it because the government made them mad. They destroyed public property. When you break the glass out of a building and set the building on fire, you're destroying a public building. That is against the law. Well, yeah, but you made me mad. That's not an excuse. If you don't like it, vote for somebody that thinks like you the next time around, but you don't get to go burn things to the ground and attack police officers. He says, I can't send him to Caesar. He's basically telling him he's appealed to Caesar, so I have to send him to Caesar. Remember the earlier statement? You've appealed to Caesar you shall go. He's telling them, you've chosen this course of action. I can't just send him there without sending anything with him. He's going to be expecting some documents from me as the governor explaining why this guy's in front of me. You got to come up with some real charges here. You got to make your case, because right now, this is what I'm sending to Rome, and it ain't making you look very good. It makes them look pretty silly. I was watching a program today, right before, matter of fact, I didn't get to finish it. If I can stay awake, I'm going to watch the rest of it when I get home. But it is about the 12 apostles and where each one of them went on their missionary journeys and where and how each one of them met their death. And it's a fascinating program. And years ago, I read the book, Fox's Book of Martyrs. Have you ever heard of it? It starts with the very first martyr. Do you remember who the first martyr was? Stephen. It starts with the first martyr, and it goes through all the martyrs. And they update it about every 10 years, and they add new martyrs to it that have been murdered in the cause of Christ. I read that condensed version of the early martyrs about 20 years ago. And it's been that long since I read it, but as I was watching this program and he would introduce the next one of the apostles, I don't remember how he died. But as he goes to going through the story, it starts becoming familiar, and I go to remembering what I had read over 20 years ago. And Fox's Book of Martyrs is a fascinating read, and I would recommend that to anyone if you've never read it. But that program that I was watching is really neat, and I was about halfway through it and it includes Paul with the 12 apostles in how each one of them, and he does it in order of when they were killed. So the first one of Jesus's disciples to die, we actually read that account that Herod Agrippa, who we're talking about tonight, Herod Agrippa had sentenced him to be killed. And he was the first of the 12 disciples to die. And that happened back in Acts chapter 8, I believe. It's just one little sentence in there where it's talking about how he had oppressed the Christians and how brutal he was against the Christians. And then it mentions in just one sentence that it adds that one disciple to the list. But really an interesting program. And I love the history of the church, and a lot of it comes from extra biblical sources, not from the Bible. from writers such as Josephus and others of the time period. And some of it was handed down. Some of it was handed down through word of mouth. This is where so and so died, and they through oral tradition passed along where they had gone to and how they died. But every one of them, except one, died the death of a martyr. And do you know which one didn't die as a martyr? John. And they tried to kill him. They boiled him in oil and he lived over it. Sometimes people that don't believe, people that don't have faith, people that aren't followers of Jesus, they go to trying to figure out how whatever happened. And I remember watching this thing on the History Channel where they were trying to explain how someone could be dropped in boiling oil and come out of it and not be burned and live over it. And if the humidity was right, and if they had this certain thing applied to their body, and if they were only in there for this length of time, and all these different things, and we're going to do an experiment, and they would take a pig carcass and they would do it up with whatever their theory was and stick it in the boiling oil and pull it out and see it's perfect, it's not harmed. So that's how it probably happened. It's a whole lot easier just to believe Jesus didn't want him dead yet. It wasn't time for him to die. Faith, sometimes people say, I've heard people say, I really admire your faith and how you can have that faith, and I just don't have faith like that. It's a lot easier to have faith than it is to believe all that other stuff. It takes more faith to believe the lie than it does to believe the truth. And man, we are living in a time where they're calling evil good and good evil. Don Lemon, the news guy, went into a church last Sunday, and there's video of him outside the church before they went in with the ringleaders of that group of protesters, and he's planning the thing out with them. He set this thing up. So he's no longer a journalist, he's an instigator. And they charge him in federal court with attacking these people's civil rights and their First Amendment right to freedom of religion, and coming into their church service and disrupting it. And then he goes online and puts out his little thing. Well, they're not real Christians. I'm a real Christian. Because Jesus, you see, Jesus would be with all these gay people and all these trans people, and he would be with these people that are being persecuted by the government right now. He would be with those people. You know what? He probably would be with those people, but he wouldn't be telling them what Don Lemon is, that everything you're doing is fine, you're okay, Jesus loves you as you are. Jesus would be telling them, go and sin no more. But they try to flip everything on its head, and that was his answer, that he was being a real Christian going into this church against these fake Christians. Are you going to believe a lie, or are you going to believe the truth? I've had a couple of people recently say to me, why do you bring politics into it? Politics is inserting itself in Christianity, and it's going to have its effect. Are we going to let it change us, or are we going to change it? What would Jesus do? What did we see Paul do? Paul didn't take himself out of politics. He inserted himself into the politics of the time to change it. And how people can look at it that way, I don't understand. We have to say something. We can't just sit back and not say anything. That's what's got us where we're at. Is because people have sat back for too long and said, well, you know what, it doesn't bother me any. Let them do what they want to do. Well, it's starting to affect you. And at some point, you got to say, I'm not with this. I don't agree with this. Somebody was asking me the other day, they said, well, it sure seems like you like Donald Trump. Well, no. I didn't vote for him in the primary. I voted for the other candidate. But the choice to vote for him or to vote for the person running against him, one of them is actually doing things to help Christians, while the other one is trying to force Christians to become the world by putting it into law. Easy decision for me. I'm going to go where Jesus leads. And I don't care if it's a political party, a politician, friends, family, whatever it is. I'm not following the world. I'm following Jesus. Jesus said, repent and sin no more. Each time that he had interaction with a sinner, he told them, go and sin no more. He didn't say, oh, we're all good. You go do your thing. I died on the cross so you can do whatever you want. That's not what he said. We got to be different. We got to be a peculiar people. And right now, too many churches and too many Christians have decided that they're going to be like the world. Well, if we're more like them, they'll want to be like us. That ain't how you do it. If they see you as being just like them, they see no reason to change. Is it going to cost you something? Yeah, it's going to cost you friends. I worry that one of these days I'm going to go to jail because the government or somebody in it isn't going to like something that I say. It's already happening in England. It's already happening in Canada. It's happening in many places around the world that preachers are going to jail. Right here in America, there were 3 little old ladies. I think the oldest one was in her 80s and the other 2 was in their 60s and 70s, that they arrested and threw in jail and charged them with the crime because they were standing across the street from an abortion clinic and praying. Do you have a First Amendment right of free speech? Apparently you do, unless you're in front of a abortion clinic and trying to pray with women so they won't kill their baby. Then you no longer have a First Amendment right at that point. And at some point, with the wrong people in government, they're going to start putting us in jail if we preach against gay marriage, if we preach against the transvestite thing, if we preach that there's not 47 different genders. And when that time comes, I'm probably going to go to jail. And I'll preach while I'm in jail. But I'm not going to change the Word of God to suit man. We got to be about doing our Lord's business. Would you stand? I hope y'all are excited about the book of Acts, because this morning, after I'd done my sermon rehash and prep and last minute notes, I just kept reading through the book of Acts. And every time I read through it, it just refreshes those stories. And the next few chapters, we're coming to the end of it. But there's so much good stuff in there. So many good stories. And I hope y'all will keep coming and keep studying the book of Acts. Feel free to read ahead. Just don't steal my jokes. Any final word before we go? Cindy, thank you for bringing all that history stuff. Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Deborah, you want to close us in prayer?